The university quad was packed with graduating seniors and their families, all dressed in their finest clothes for the commencement ceremony. I stood in my cap and gown, clutching my diploma in art history with a concentration in digital humanities, watching other families celebrate their children's achievements with pride and excitement. My family's reaction was markedly different. "So that's it?" Dad asked, examining my diploma like it was a counterfeit bill. 4 years and $80,000 for a piece of paper that says you studied art? Art history, I corrected. With digital humanities. I specialized in using technology to preserve and analyze cultural artifacts. Digital humanities, my brother Mark repeated with a snort. That's not even a real field. It's just fancy words for looking at pictures on a computer. Mom tried to be supportive. I'm sure Maya learned a lot. College is about more than just career preparation. College is exactly about career preparation, Dad replied sharply. And this degree prepares her for nothing except maybe working in a gift shop at a museum. We were standing near the university's art building, where banners celebrated the achievements of various faculty members. One particularly large banner featured my advisor, Professor Dr. Elena Chin, highlighting her recent research on using artificial intelligence to authenticate historical artworks. Look at that, Mark pointed to the banner. Even your professor's research sounds made up. AI art authentication? Come on. Professor Chen's work is groundbreaking, I said defensively. She's developing algorithms that can detect forgeries and help museums verify the authenticity of their collections. Groundbreaking, Dad repeated mockingly. Maya, you've spent 4 years studying finger painting and Renaissance sculptures. Meanwhile, Mark finished his engineering degree and already has a job lined up with Boeing. Mark adjusted his own cap and gown smugly. Starting salary is $85,000 plus benefits. That's what a real degree gets you. Engineering builds things, Dad continued. Medicine heals people. Business creates jobs. But art history? What does that contribute to society? It preserves culture and helps us understand human civilization, I replied, though I could hear how defensive I sounded. That's a luxury for rich people who don't need to work for a living, Dad said. You're not rich, Maya. You need a career that pays bills. The conversation was interrupted by several of my classmates approaching to say goodbye. They were excited about their post-graduation plans. Some were starting graduate programs, others had landed positions at prestigious museums and cultural institutions. Maya, called Jessica, who'd been in several of my digital humanities seminars. Are you still planning to work with Professor Chin on the Vatican project this summer? What Vatican project? Mom asked. Professor Chin received a grant to digitally analyze and authenticate a collection of Renaissance manuscripts, I explained. She asked me to assist with the research. Is it paid? Dad asked immediately. It's a research assistantship. The pay isn't much, but the experience is invaluable. Invaluable experience doesn't pay student loans, Dad replied. Maya, you need to face reality. This art history fantasy has to end. You need to find a real job with real income. Mark nodded in agreement. Maybe you could go back to school for something practical. Business administration maybe. Or get certified in something useful like project management. I don't want to do business administration. What you want is irrelevant, Dad said. What matters is what pays the bills. Your art degree is completely worthless. What a waste of money and time. The words stung more than I expected. I'd spent 4 years passionate about my studies, excited about the intersection of technology and cultural preservation. Professor Chin had told me I had real talent for digital analysis and research methodology. But standing in the quad surrounded by families celebrating practical degrees and solid career prospects, I felt suddenly uncertain about my choices. Let's just go to lunch, Mom suggested, trying to defuse the tension. We can discuss Maya's future later. As we walked toward the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I glanced at it absently, then stopped walking altogether. The headline read, Nobel Prize in Literature awarded to Dr. Elena Chin for revolutionary work in digital cultural preservation. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. Maya, come on, Mark called. What are you looking at? I opened the full article, my hands shaking slightly. The Nobel Committee had awarded Professor Chen the Literature Prize for her pioneering work in using artificial intelligence to preserve and authenticate cultural artifacts, specifically citing her breakthrough methodologies in digital humanities. Why? Mom asked. What's wrong? You look pale. I scrolled down to the section about Professor Chen's research team, and there it was. My name listed as a key collaborative researcher who had contributed significantly to the algorithmic development that made her discoveries possible. The article specifically mentioned the Vatican project that Jessica had referenced, describing it as the proof of concept that had validated Professor Chen's entire methodology. Maya, seriously, what's going on? Dad demanded. I looked up at my family, still processing what I'd just read. My supposedly worthless degree had just been validated by the Nobel Committee. My made-up field of digital humanities had just been recognized as revolutionary scholarship. And my name was in the announcement as a collaborative researcher. The build-up. Professor Chen won the Nobel Prize, I said quietly. What? Mark laughed. The art teacher? Nobel Prizes are for real scientists. She won the Literature Prize for her work in digital cultural preservation, I said, holding up my phone. The same work I've been assisting with for 2 years. Dad looked skeptical. Let me see that. I handed him my phone, watching his expression change as he read the article. His initial dismissive smirk faded as he encountered terms like revolutionary methodology and paradigm-shifting research. This says she's been working on this for 15 years, he said slowly. Yes. I've been part of her research team since my sophomore year. Research team? Mom asked. You never mentioned being on a research team. I tried to explain my work with Professor Chen multiple times. You always changed the subject or dismissed it as playing with computers. Mark grabbed the phone from Dad. This can't be right. Nobel Prizes don't go to people who study art. The Literature Prize has gone to historians, philosophers, and cultural scholars before, I said. Professor Chen's work bridges literature, history, and technology. But what does this have to do with you? Dad asked. You're just a student. I took back my phone and scrolled to the section that mentioned research collaborators. Right here. Dr. Chen specifically acknowledges the contributions of her research assistant Maya Rodriguez, whose algorithmic insights were crucial to developing the authentication protocols that made this work possible. The family went quiet as they processed this information. It also says here that the Vatican project I'm working on this summer is being funded by a $2.3 million grant from the European Union, I continued. And that museums around the world are implementing Professor Chen's methodologies to verify their collections. I don't understand, Mark said. You're saying your art degree is actually important? I'm saying that what you dismissed as worthless has just been recognized by the Nobel Committee as revolutionary scholarship. We stood in the parking lot while my family tried to reconcile their assumptions about my education with this new information. Other graduating families walked past us, heading to celebratory lunches, while we remained frozen in confusion. Maya, Mom said carefully, when you said you were working with Professor Chen, we thought you meant filing papers or making copies. I've been developing algorithms to analyze brushstroke patterns in Renaissance paintings. My senior thesis created a mathematical model for detecting forgeries in 15th century manuscripts. That's actually impressive, Dad admitted reluctantly. It's the same work I've been trying to tell you about for 2 years. The work you called playing with computers. Mark was reading the article more carefully. This says Professor Chen's methodology has applications in archaeology, literature, and historical research. Museums are paying millions to implement her authentication systems. And I helped develop those systems. So when you said the Vatican project was invaluable experience, Dad said slowly, you meant working on Nobel Prize-winning research? I meant working on cutting-edge digital humanities research that preserves cultural heritage and prevents art fraud. The Nobel Prize is just confirmation that the work is significant. My phone started ringing. The caller ID showed Professor Chen's number. I should answer this, I said. Paya. Professor Chen's voice was excited and slightly breathless. Have you seen the news? I just read about it. Congratulations, Professor. This is incredible. Maya, I need you to know that your work was absolutely essential to this achievement. The authentication algorithms you developed were the breakthrough that made everything else possible. My family was listening to every word, their faces showing increasing bewilderment. The committee specifically asked about my research team, Professor Chen continued. I made sure they understood your contributions. You're going to be invited to the awards ceremony in Stockholm. I'm going to what? The Nobel Committee invites key researchers to attend the ceremony. Maya, you're not just my student anymore. You're my research partner. And after this recognition, universities around the world are going to want to hire you. Hire me? I've already received calls from Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford asking if you'd be interested in doctoral programs with full funding. They want you to continue developing your authentication methodologies. I looked at my family, who were staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Professor, can I call you back? I'm with my family. Of course. But Maya, I hope you realize that what we've accomplished together is going to change how the world preserves and studies cultural heritage. You should be very proud. After hanging up, I turned to face my family's shocked faces. So, I said carefully, still think my degree is worthless? The revelation. The silence in the parking lot stretched for what felt like an eternity. My family stood around me, processing the reality that their assumptions about my education and career prospects had been completely wrong. You're going to Stockholm? Mom asked weakly. To the Nobel Prize ceremony? Apparently. Because of your art degree, Dad said, the words coming out like he was testing a foreign language. Because of my research in digital humanities. The field you said wasn't real. Mark was still staring at my phone, reading and rereading the article. This says museums are implementing Professor Chen's methods worldwide. That they're revolutionizing art authentication and cultural preservation. And that I helped develop those methods. But you never said. Dad started, then stopped himself. Actually, you did try to tell us. We just didn't listen. Every time I explained my work with Professor Chen, you assumed I was doing busy work or simple tasks. When I talked about algorithmic development, you thought I meant using computer programs someone else had written. Mom looked embarrassed. We thought digital humanities was just a fancy name for looking at art on computers. Digital humanities is using computational methods to analyze cultural data in ways that weren't possible before. It's allowing us to understand art, literature, and history in completely new ways. And you're good at this? Dad asked, as if the concept was still sinking in. Apparently good enough that Harvard and Stanford want to offer me doctoral funding. The weight of their misunderstanding was finally hitting them. For years, they dismissed my academic interests as impractical and my career goals as unrealistic. They'd pushed me toward practical fields while I was already succeeding in groundbreaking research. Maya, Mark said quietly, when you graduate with your PhD from Harvard or Stanford, what kind of job will you get? Universities are creating new departments in digital humanities. Museums need authentication specialists. Tech companies are hiring cultural data analysts. The Vatican project alone has led to consulting offers from the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum, and the British Museum. Consulting offers? Dad's voice had a different tone now, the tone he used when discussing Mark's engineering salary. Professor Chen said the authentication work we're doing can command six-figure consulting fees. Museums pay millions to verify their collections and prevent fraud. The revelation was complete. The daughter they'd worried about supporting financially was developing expertise that commanded premium rates from the world's most prestigious cultural institutions. So when you said you wanted to work in museums, Mom said slowly, you didn't mean as a tour guide. I meant as a digital authentication specialist. Someone who uses technology to verify the authenticity and preserve the integrity of cultural artifacts. That's a real career? Mark asked. It's such a new and specialized field that there are only a few dozen people in the world who can do what I do. The demand far exceeds the supply. Dad sat down. Maya, I owe you an apology. We misunderstood your studies. You refused to understand, I said. You thought art history was just paintings and sculptures. Mom frowned. Isn't it? No. It's research, data analysis, cultural study, and technology. Mark muttered. And apparently more advanced than engineering. My phone buzzed. Jessica. Maya. Did you see the news? Professor Chen is in the Washington Post about the Nobel Prize. Your name's in it. She added, my mom asked if I should have studied art history instead of business. I hung up, my family stunned. A degree they mocked was now envied. Dad asked, "You're going to the Nobel Prize ceremony?" "Yes." As Professor Chen's research partner. The reversal was overwhelming. Just hours ago they'd been embarrassed. Now they were shocked to find I'd been part of Nobel-winning work. The aftermath. At lunch they struggled to ask about my field. "So authentication helps museums prove art is real?" Dad asked. "Yes. It also detects forgeries and preserves records. And there's money in this? Art fraud is worth billions. Authentication is valuable." Mark checked salaries online. "Some of these pay more than engineering." "I tried to tell you," I said. "But you never listened." Mom looked guilty. "We only wanted to protect you. You assumed failure instead of trying to understand." Over time they changed. Dad bragged about my Nobel connection. Mark grew curious about my research. Mom read articles about digital preservation. Still, I knew their pride came from outside validation. Before the Nobel they were ashamed. After they were proud. The recognition opened doors. A Harvard fellowship, major museum projects, international consulting. 6 months later I stood in Stockholm as Professor Chen accepted the Nobel Prize. She named me in her speech. My family watched on TV, realizing my worthless degree had earned global recognition. The girl they once told to be practical was now helping preserve human culture with technology. Sometimes the best answer to doubt isn't argument. It's achievement so undeniable the whole world has to notice.